The story begins on the 24th of January, 2023, in Duxbury, Massachusetts, a quiet coastal community where families lived ordinary lives. Children went to school, and neighbors knew little about the private struggles unfolding behind closed doors. That evening, the Clancy family home would become the center of a tragedy that shocked Massachusetts and quickly drew national attention. Inside the house was 32-year-old Lindsay Clancy, a former labor and delivery nurse at Massachusetts General Hospital and a mother of 3 young children: 5-year-old Cora, 3-year-old Dawson, and 8-month-old Callan. What happened inside that home would leave 3 children dead, a family devastated, and a courtroom years later forced to confront one of the most difficult questions in criminal law. Was Lindsay Clancy legally responsible for her actions, or was she experiencing a severe mental health crisis that destroyed her ability to understand what she was doing? More than 3 years after that January night, Clancy would appear before a jury in Plymouth Superior Court, facing 3 counts of first-degree murder. But to understand how the case reached that courtroom, we first have to go back to the months before the killings and to the dramatic changes in Lindsay Clancy's mental health following the birth of her youngest child. By the afternoon of the 24th of January, 2023, the situation inside the Clancy home was about to take a devastating turn. According to the prosecution's account, Lindsay asked her husband, Patrick, to leave the house for a short time. She gave him specific errands to run, pick up takeout food, and stop at a nearby CVS to get medication for one of their children. Patrick left, and for a brief period, Lindsay was alone in the house with all 3 children. What happened next would become the central event of the entire criminal case. Lindsay took Cora, Dawson, and Callan into the finished basement. Prosecutors allege that she used exercise resistance bands to strangle the children, one after another. Cora and Dawson died that evening. 8-month-old Callan was found alive when emergency responders arrived, but his condition was critical. Despite medical treatment, he died 3 days later in the hospital. The tragedy did not end there. After the attacks on her children, Lindsay attempted to take her own life. She used a knife to cut her wrists and neck before jumping from a 2nd-story bedroom window. The fall caused catastrophic injuries, including a spinal fracture that left her paralyzed from the waist down. Then Patrick came home. At first, he saw Lindsay lying severely injured in the backyard. He immediately called 911, but as the dispatcher tried to determine what had happened, Patrick went inside the house, and then he discovered the children. The 911 call captured his reaction in real time. His voice became increasingly frantic as he realized what had happened to his family. At one point, he cried out, "She killed the kids." That approximately 7-minute emergency call would later become one of the most emotionally powerful pieces of evidence presented to the jury. Lindsay survived her suicide attempt, but the injuries permanently changed her life. She remained paralyzed and would eventually appear in court using a wheelchair. But while the physical evidence seemed to tell one story, the question that would dominate the courtroom for years was far more complicated. What was happening inside Lindsay Clancy's mind when she killed her children? That question would become the heart of the trial. In the aftermath of the killings, investigators moved quickly. An arrest warrant was issued for Lindsay Clancy, and she was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. Additional strangulation-related charges were also filed initially, although those charges were later dropped as redundant. But from the very beginning, Lindsay's defense was not based on denying that she killed her children. Instead, the central question was why she did it, and whether she was legally responsible for her actions at the time. Her defense attorney, Kevin Reddington, argued that Lindsay had been suffering from postpartum psychosis, a rare but extremely serious psychiatric condition that can cause hallucinations, delusions, and a profound break from reality. The defense also pointed to the extensive psychiatric treatment Lindsay had received in the months leading up to the killings, including the large number of medications prescribed to her. According to the defense account, Lindsay experienced something terrifying in the days surrounding the tragedy. She reportedly heard a male voice, one she had never heard before, and says she has never heard again. The defense says that voice gave her a horrifying command to kill her children and then take her own life. According to Lindsay's account, she believes she had no choice. She acted immediately on what she believed the voice was telling her and was unable to resist it. Her attorneys argue that this severe mental state meant she could not be held criminally responsible under Massachusetts law, but prosecutors presented a dramatically different interpretation of the same events. The Plymouth County District Attorney's Office argued that Lindsay's actions were not the result of an uncontrollable psychotic episode, but a deliberate and calculated plan. Prosecutors pointed specifically to the errands Patrick was sent to complete. In their view, sending her husband out of the house created a window of time when Lindsay could be alone with the children and carry out the killings without interruption. During opening statements, Assistant District Attorney Shannon Buckingham described the killings as deliberate, arguing that Lindsay acted with premeditation and extreme atrocity and cruelty. The prosecution's position was straightforward. They believed Lindsay understood what she was doing, made conscious decisions leading up to the killings, and should therefore be held fully responsible under the law, and the stakes could not have been higher. A conviction for first-degree murder in Massachusetts carries life in prison without the possibility of parole. But if the jury ultimately determined that Lindsay was not criminally responsible because of her mental state, the outcome would be very different. Rather than a prison sentence, she could be committed to a state mental health facility. So the trial was never simply about whether Lindsay Clancy killed her children. She had not made that the central dispute. The real battle was over her state of mind. Was she a mother who deliberately planned the deaths of her 3 children? Or was she experiencing a devastating psychiatric crisis that had completely disconnected her from reality? That question would eventually bring psychiatrists, medical records, investigators, family members, and courtroom experts into the case and force a jury to examine what happened inside Lindsay Clancy's mind on the 24th of January, 2023. For the Clancy family, the January 2023 tragedy did not lead to a quick resolution. Instead, the case moved slowly through the Massachusetts court system, with years of legal and psychiatric proceedings taking place before the murder trial could finally begin. During that period, Lindsay Clancy remained at Duxbury Hospital under court-ordered psychiatric care. Meanwhile, attorneys on both sides fought over what evidence the jury would ultimately be allowed to see and hear. Some of that evidence was deeply disturbing. Among the issues addressed during pretrial hearings were the 911 recording, photographs connected to the children's deaths, and photographs of the children taken while they were still alive. These decisions mattered because the prosecution wanted to present the jury with a complete picture of what happened inside the Clancy home, while the defense had to consider the emotional impact that graphic evidence could have on the proceedings. Then, after more than 3.5 years of legal battles, the case finally reached trial. In July 2026, jury selection began at Plymouth Superior Court, with Judge William F. Sullivan presiding. The court ultimately seated 12 jurors, along with 6 alternates. On the 27th of July 2026, the trial officially began with opening statements. The prosecution and defense presented 2 completely different explanations for the same devastating night, and then came the testimony. One of the first and most important witnesses for the prosecution was Patrick Clancy, Lindsay's husband and the father of the 3 children. Patrick spent 2 days on the witness stand describing what happened when he returned home on the 24th of January, 2023. He told jurors about finding Lindsay critically injured outside the house and then going inside and discovering his children in the basement. The courtroom also heard the 911 call Patrick made that night. As the recording played, Lindsay sat at the defense table and cried. For the jury, it was not simply a piece of evidence. It was a recording of a father discovering the unimaginable in real time. First responders also took the stand. They described arriving at the home and encountering a chaotic and traumatic scene, including Lindsay's serious injuries and the children inside the house. The medical examiner later presented evidence concerning the children's deaths, including autopsy findings and photographs. The evidence was so emotionally difficult that Lindsay again broke down in court. But the prosecution's case was not built solely around the physical evidence. People who knew Lindsay personally also testified. Her former nanny and friends described her as a loving and attentive mother, someone they had known to care deeply about her children. At the same time, witnesses also described conversations in the days before the killings in which Lindsay had expressed increasingly disturbing and dark thoughts. That testimony became important because it touched directly on the central issue of the trial. What was Lindsay's mental state in the days leading up to January 24? Was the behavior evidence of a severe psychiatric breakdown? Or did it show that she was aware of what she was doing and capable of planning her actions? As the trial continued, jurors were also shown more technical evidence, including DNA evidence, medication bottles recovered from the home, and bloodstain analysis. Piece by piece, the prosecution was reconstructing the events of that night, but the defense had its own evidence to present. And as the trial moved deeper into expert psychiatric testimony, the courtroom would begin focusing less on what happened and more on why it happened. By early August 2026, the trial had entered its second week, with the court reaching day 9 of testimony. And now, the focus was shifting toward one of the most complicated questions in the entire case: Lindsay Clancy's mental state before the killings. Psychiatrists who had treated Lindsay before the 24th of January, 2023, began taking the witness stand. Their testimony was expected to help the jury understand what Lindsay had been experiencing in the months and days leading up to the tragedy, and whether her documented psychiatric problems could have affected her ability to understand or control her actions. The defense continued to emphasize her serious mental health crisis, her psychiatric treatment, and the extensive list of medications she had been prescribed. Their argument remained that Lindsay was experiencing a profound psychiatric breakdown, and that her behavior could not simply be understood as the actions of someone thinking normally. But prosecutors continued to point the jury in the opposite direction. They focused on the decisions Lindsay made that afternoon and evening, particularly the steps she took before the killings. To the prosecution, those actions demonstrated planning, awareness, and the ability to deliberately carry out a course of action. And that difference in interpretation sits at the very heart of this trial, because everyone in the courtroom knows what happened to the 3 children. The undisputed tragedy is that Cora, Dawson, and Callan lost their lives. The question the jury must ultimately answer is something different. Was Lindsay Clancy criminally responsible for those deaths? That is why this case has attracted national attention. It is not only a murder prosecution, it is also a deeply uncomfortable examination of maternal mental health, postpartum psychiatric illness, medical treatment, and the limits of criminal responsibility. It forces the public to consider a question that is difficult to even ask. Can someone who admits to killing her own children be found legally not criminally responsible because of a severe mental illness? And if the jury reaches that conclusion, what should happen next? As of the 8th of August 2026, the trial in Plymouth, Massachusetts, is still underway. The jury has not yet begun deliberations, and there is no verdict. The courtroom battle continues, with prosecutors attempting to prove that Lindsay Clancy deliberately planned and carried out the killings, while the defense argues that a devastating psychiatric crisis robbed her of the ability to understand or control what she was doing. For the families involved, there is no simple ending to this story. 3 young lives were lost. A father was left to face an unimaginable loss, and Lindsay Clancy's own life was permanently changed by the events of that January night. Now, more than 3 years later, the final decision rests with a jury. And until that jury reaches its verdict, one of the most closely watched criminal cases in Massachusetts remains